Excellent. Well, Eve, I'm so excited to see you and to have you back, like best-selling author of both Fair Play and now Finding Your Unicorn Space. So I feel like first off, like tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you even became an author and started writing all this.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I have to say you look great in yellow. I'm copying you. I think, Monica, the way I'm sure you didn't necessarily know the way your career path would unfold. I did not have gender division of labor specialist on my third grade. What do you want to be when you grow up board? I probably had like astronaut or something like that. But I think what happens to most people is that, our life experiences start to come together, especially as you get older. And for me, it was an understanding that research is really me search, and how understanding that in my own marriage, which I call the Blueberries Breakdown, that 10 years ago, my husband Seth sent me a text, right, that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries."
Oh my gosh. And that's how your other book opens, which is so cool. And
that's how Fair Play opens.
Yeah. So many people can relate to that, the blueberry incident.
Right. Where you're being defined as your roles as the fulfiller of someone's smoothie needs or whatever roles you're being defined as. But I would say that the catalyst of understanding, Monica, the erasure I felt after kids came into my life, that I had been sold a lie that I could be or do anything, just like, the boys in my class, all of those feelings started to coalesce into, for me, activism. And that's really how I started to write, because I never thought I would write books. That wasn't in my cards, but it was an understanding that if my story can help others, then I want to share it.
Definitely. And how, Eve, tell us a little bit about, like, all right, you wrote one book. I'm sure that wasn't easy to do. Was it like, is writing the book that you talk a little bit about it too? Like, is the reason you wrote the second, because I want to talk about what a unicorn space is next, because I feel like I was so excited to read that and to learn more about it. But like, is writing your unicorn space?
It's one of them, but I think as it's become my job, I've needed other unicorn spaces. So I'll explain what I mean by that. Well, Monica, we, especially women, we've been taught since birth that our time is not valuable. Our most valuable currency, I would argue, our time is we give it away for free to everybody else around us. And we condition women to think that that's the way things are, that's okay. We say things to women like breastfeeding is free, when it's really an 1,800 hour a year job. We know that if women enter male professions, salaries automatically go down. But what I didn't realize was I was internalizing those messages for myself. And so this second book, Find Your Unicorn Space, is a sequel to Fair Play, because what was happening was that so many women were saying to me, even if I have time back, which is what Fair Play talks about, how to value our time, to treat it like diamonds and to reclaim it, I wouldn't even know what to do with that found time.
Yeah.
And that was really alarming to me. And then when I asked further, what are the feelings that you're experiencing right now about home life? The top two that came to my word cloud in 17 countries, Monica, was overwhelm and boredom.
Yeah.
And to me, that felt like a deadly combination even before the pandemic. And then, of course, it's going to be worse when women's unpaid labor increases, when children are now forced to come into the home because of a global pandemic. So it was really an understanding that the antidote to burnout no longer is a walk around the block. I wish I could tell you it was. I wish I could tell you the antidote to burnout was a drink with friends. But what this book is about is that the antidote to burnout, really, there's nothing better and more important than being interested in our own lives.
Definitely. And what, define a little bit for us, because as I started to read this, I thought I knew what a unicorn space was, but I actually didn't. So tell everybody a little bit about, like, what is a unicorn space? Like, how would you define it, Eve?
Well, for me, the idea of a unicorn space is because there was no words to describe what people were saying to me, which is, it was not a hobby. So what unicorn space is not, is it's not a space for you that's a hobby, which connoted in frequency. I strum the guitar when I can. It wasn't a passion project, because that means that you have to have one passion and often commoditize it. It wasn't a side hustle. It wasn't self-care because again, it wasn't these experiences of just, doing a one-off spin class. And it wasn't friendships, even though they came along with a unicorn space. It was something different. We've often heard of it as the flow state, but really the way a unicorn space manifests is that it's an active pursuit that makes you come alive. And when you come alive, after, what you often say in that unicorn space is, I can't believe I just did that. And that's the feeling I want for people.
Oh my gosh. And Eve, that was like, when I read that, that was kind of like game changing for me, because for a long time, like when I saw the title and like before, when I got the book, I thought that I understood like the unicorn space would be like a hobby or spending time with your friends or like all of those things that you do to refuel. And I thought it was like so revolutionary that you took what we need as women and what we need like to remember what our passion is, to actually be creative. And I thought like to me, that was like game changing, right? Because you think that you're doing all of these things that you need to build yourself back. But to your point, like the end result of that can still be like that feeling of like, what am I doing? And like, where am I going with my life? Even as you're in like your 30s and 40s, right? But the biggest question that I had reading the book, and this is like more for myself than anything else, and kind of what you started to is like, for me, Monica and Andy is my unicorn space.
Yes, that's good.
At what point is it like, do you need like a unicorn on top of your unicorn? Because like your own unicorn space becomes like a work to a certain degree. So I wondered like
absolutely. I love that you asking that question, because let's go into the data. So what we found was that there were a lot of women or minoritized populations that said to me, I'm so used to being available. I don't have a permission to be unavailable for my role. So this idea of unavailability is actually challenging to my identity. I wouldn't know what to do if I wasn't available to everybody else. That's why I'm interrupted every 3 minutes and 42 seconds. That's why there's a passion gap. For those people, the first step of a unicorn space, curiosity, is what was missing. But the other 2 steps of a unicorn space cycle, the 3 C's of a unicorn space, is curiosity, connection, and completion. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting about what you're saying, Monica, was as many people said to me, I don't even know how to find it. More people were saying to me, well, I don't know when it's complete. Because the idea of, okay, I founded this business, does it always have to grow? Do I always have to be EBITDA positive? Do I always have to acquire more customers? Is it always positive cash flow? Is it expanding into 17 countries? So really being intentional about what it means to complete something, to say, you know what, I want to look back and say, look what I did. Look what I did with Monica and Andy. I'm a successful entrepreneur that other people can follow. I have lessons around failure and success that I can share. Like that's a completion, no matter what happens with the growth of your company over a long term. But I will say that that is sometimes hard because, again, we're allowed to be perfect and quiet. We're not allowed to be loud and wrong. And so as a unicorn space becomes a business, what I will just say is that sometimes you need a unicorn on top of your unicorn. You just need something that's just for you, in that, you know what, it still has a curiosity, it still has a connection, it still has a completion point, but maybe it's a little bit less intense. Maybe it's that you want to learn to bake a gluten-free pie to share it with your celiac neighbor, and you're going to learn how to mix flours. For me, as activism became my main unicorn space, I became obsessed with how to make chocolate. I haven't gotten to make chocolate yet, but I have a lot of videos that say tagged how to make chocolate. And I love dance. So I returned to an advanced jazz class that I take online.
And that was something else I thought about as I was reading the book. Even I was looking at like what I was doing and kind of what my daughter was doing. And if you hear like a tapping in the background, she just walked in, is like tapping on her computer with something. But do you feel like figuring out your unicorn space is actually something you lose? Because as I watch like a 10-year-old girl, it's like their whole, like not their whole life, but so much of what you do as a kid is like your unicorn space, right? Like you're writing because it's fun, you're drawing, there's like not limits to what you think you're good at or you're not good at. So you're fearless to go out and do things. So in some ways is the idea of like reclaiming your unicorn space. Like, did we sort of know what it was when we were kids? And then somewhere along the way, we just like, we lose sight of like that, is that exploring our creativity is something that like we as moms are also entitled to do.
Well, I love it so much. I love that question. I think it's such an important question because I think it really gets back to what we said earlier about women's time. This idea that I would choose to spend time on myself. I choose to spend time building Legos, not with my children. Even saying it, hearing other women say it, it connotes guilt and shame. This idea that I'm not creative, or that's for my youth, or when you're an adult, you don't make time for that, or I'm interrupted. I don't have the time to do the things I need to do, Eve. Well, how could I have time to do things that I want to do? So what happens is that the whole world starts to conspire against us. And I don't say that, look, I'm very humorous. I like to go dark to go light, but it's important to recognize that this is not a us problem. This is a societal problem where we're told as women up through schooling that we could be anything we want. Mm-hmm. And then 10 years later, around 31, regardless of whether we have children, all of that is exposed as a lie. We start getting hit with real bias in middle management. We get hit with a lack of venture capital funding, where only 2% of funding goes to female founded businesses if there's not a male co-founder. We get stuck with the motherhood penalty, which is that if you're a mother, 75% of our pay gap is because we're mothers. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that lie that we could be anything and dream big, which I think women do better than anybody, gets slowly eroded to the point where we don't even have a name left. Where I remember the first time, Monica, I didn't have a name, and thank God your name is actually on your company. But the first time that my name was erased was when Zach, my first son, was handed to me in the hospital. And the nurse said to me, "Good morning, Mom. How are you feeling?" That was the end of my name. And it continued on where I started to put my children's initials on my neck, where I was sitting in a preschool class where the teacher said, "Look around. These are the people who are going to support you for the next 10 years. They're going to love you and you're going to know them better than anybody." And then simultaneously looking down at my name tag that said Zach's mom and saying, wait a second, these people are going to know me better than anyone's ever going to know me. They don't even know my name. Mm-hmm. And so I think what happens is it's almost bigger than a return to our creative life. It's an understanding that a return to our creative life is actually frowned upon, not allowed in this society where availability of women has become our social safety net.
And one of the things that you talk about, like, one of the first things that really struck me that I loved about your thought process about like really tapping into this like unicorn creativity space is I always thought about creativity in the way where people are actually like drawing or artistic. And I was not like, well, I admire that so much. Like, I'm not very good at like art and drawing. Like I wish I was better, but I think the coolest thing for women to realize is like creativity is that, and then so much beyond that too. And whether it's like building a business or writing a book, like creativity can come in so many different shapes and sizes. And I think sometimes like the word creativity is like more singularly defined. And like, I think all of us, to your point, has like that creative potential, and creativity can mean something different for everybody. But one of the things that really struck a chord with me was this idea about leaving your creative legacy. Can you tell everybody a little bit about like, what does that mean?
Well, I think the real beauty in understanding the stakes, that creativity is not optional, is that it's linked to daily flourishing. So what I think is important to understand, and I'll nerd out a little bit with you in the science, is that there is often a correlation between meaning and happiness. So they correlate, but oftentimes they don't. So there are times when we have happiness without meaning. That is doom scrolling. Sometimes it's our social media practices, binge watching TV, the coping mechanisms that at least I know I had a lot of those during the pandemic. So there's happiness without meaning. There's also meaning without happiness, which is often correlated to caregiving. So I know that I'd rather be in a root canal chair than take care of Anna, my toddler. As much as I love you, Anna, I would rather be in a root canal chair than be with you. And that meaning without happy, we know that there's happiness, there's existential meaning, but often not happiness associated with caregiving. So what we're talking about here is a life that even it's going to rain on us. We know it's going to rain. But if you recognize that sometimes you deserve an intersection of meaning and happiness, experiences where you look back and you say, that couldn't be taken away from me, whether it's skydiving or your support group or creating a business and looking back at that legacy of, I can't believe I did that. Those are those experiences that get us through these hard times. Because I think the problem is that we focus too much on the paintbrushes of the past, like you said, about what creativity can mean in a very limited scope. But also what happens is that we often look at it as a one-off, like, well, okay, I made that painting and I'm done. What we're talking about is a daily practice or a weekly practice or a lifelong practice of having experiences that intersect with our meaning and happiness. Those are unicorn space experiences. And while I can't tell you what they are for you out there, what I can do is I can help you find them by saying that when you understand that it's a cycle of curiosity, connection, sharing that with the world, and some sort of completion, to me, it's a lot less scary than saying I have to be creative or I have to find my passion. It's a cycle. And we can exist in many, many cycles like that, and they can change over time.
And I feel like Eve, you and I are in like now fortunate positions where like so much of our unicorn space is like what we get to do, which maybe means we need additional unicorns.
Right.
Well. But let's talk about, I get a chance like so often now to meet so many like new moms, right? Like they're getting into the fray. So many people have, I mean, oh my gosh, like new motherhood during the pandemic, like the inability to like get out and just meet other people and be able to get out of your house. Let's talk a little bit about like, how do people reignite their purpose? So it's like, you're kind of, you're in the baseline of motherhood, right? Like you're just starting, you've got like a 5-month-old or a 9-month-old, you're barely keeping your head up water, you're having trouble, barely getting any sleep. Like, how do you start to think about being able to like reignite that creative purpose?
Well, it's a great question. I think that's why we're here together today, because we recognize that creativity is not optional. And so an important statistic to know is that everybody, we now know from science that everybody, the super majority of people say that they're going to be less busy in 6 months. So we all say that. And then when the time researchers came up to them in 6 months later, guess what? They reported being more busy. So the point is, you can say to yourself, I'm just going to wait till the baby stage is over. I'm going to wait till the toddler stage is over. I'm going to wait till my child's in school. But what happens is, if you do that, in my research, what I saw was a 10-year passion gap. If you let yourself go for 10 years, again, not your fault. That's what we're here to say. This is society conspiring against you. Remember, I didn't even get to keep my name. But the idea that while, yes, the air is polluted, yes, we are fighting on your behalf for paid leave and universal childcare and to make it easier to be a parent in America. But until then, we have to breathe the polluted air. And to do that is to say we deserve permission to be unavailable from our roles. You are more than your roles as a parent and or partner and or professional. And by professional, I mean anybody who works in the home or works unpaid. I mean, outside of the home or works unpaid in the home. We are not RPs. We're not parents and or partners and or professionals only. We are human beings that deserve sustained attention for things that we love. And that's more than just a one-off spin class. Like I said, that should be the baseline. But the idea that we deserve a creative life is a different way to look at life. And I'll give you an example of one of my favorite books by Ernest Hemingway. There's a man who talks about how he lost his fortune. He says, basically, gradually and then suddenly. So that's what happens to all of us. These are gradual death by 1,000 cuts. And then one day you wake up and you say, I don't have the career marriage combo I thought I was going to have. And that surprise and shame is what I don't want anybody to feel. So you start where you are now. We see you, we know how hard it is, but we're also here to tell you that you deserve a permission to be unavailable from your roles.
And Eve, one of the things you talk about that I thought was really interesting is like the rules of permission and this whole idea of permission to find your unicorn space. Tell us a little bit about the rules of permission.
And by the way, this should be your unicorn space. I think you should also have a show on MSNBC, Monica, because you're a really great interviewer. And you're gorgeous. Anyway, but the rules of permission. So many creativity books First, I have to say that it's different than a How to Be Happy book. As much as I love the happiness books, some of them have been co-opted, where one woman said to me, Eve, I've gratitude journaled myself to death. So don't do that. And recognize that, sometimes when we pursue happiness as an end goal, it can actually make us more sad. So this is not a How to Be Happy book. This is a how to have sustained attention for things that you love book, because that's really important to your mental and physical health. Mm-hmm. But the way white men write about creativity is they just jump into a plan for creativity. We have that in the book. That's the plan around curiosity, connection, and completion. The first half of the book could not do that, Monica. I had to talk about and address the hurdles for why we don't do it anyway. Mm-hmm. Because we are not white men who have stay-at-home wives. That is not the demographic that I sit in. And so I don't have sustained attention for things that I love unless I fight for it. And so the 3 hurdles that people in 17 countries, women identifying people, said to me were the hardest for them was, one, as we just said, I don't even believe I deserve to have a permission to be unavailable for my roles. And then number 2, coming right behind it like the racehorse, was, even if I do believe I have permission to be unavailable for my roles, when I'm doing that creative thing, guilt and shame reigns on my parade. And even if guilt and shame doesn't rain on my parade, then I can't ask for what I need, so I keep getting interrupted. Mm-hmm. So those were the 3 big hurdles to a unicorn space life, to having these experiences. This lack of availability, the inability to vanquish guilt and shame, and an inability to ask for what we need. So all 3 of those, ironically, there's 2 chapters on communication in a book about creativity, but I think it's because asking for what we need is probably the hardest part in terms of living a creative life.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting with COVID. I feel like there's a lot more, you're doing things virtually, right? A lot of people are working from home. And I think part of like the permission to be creative was like sometimes found in the spaces in between.
Right.
Like you didn't even realize it, right? But like, you'd be listening to a podcast and you get an idea about this, and like you're on your way to work, or you're ducking out for a coffee. And I think this whole idea that you talked about, like letting go of your shoulds, like I feel like now, you're home, you're working, or whether you're home and you're taking care of a baby or whatever it is, it's like there's not a lot of moments in the day now that present themselves where you should always be doing this, or you should be doing that. Or at least, even for me, that's what I'm telling myself. Like I should be doing another meeting. I should be sitting down and answering another email. Like I should be doing X, Y, and Z. Unfortunately, I'm married to somebody that does lots of housework. Rob is wonderful. So I feel like
that's why I said I love you guys, because you're a fair play approved couple.
Yes, like, but even with that, even with us both sharing so many responsibilities, I feel like there's always these shoulds. And I look around sometimes and I think like we're fortunate to be in creative spaces for both of what we're doing from a work perspective. But like, how do you let go of your shoulds? Because I struggle with that so much.
Well, again, especially because again, there's an expectation when your work is your unicorn space, right there, it can get conflated. So there's definitely a lot of shoulds, and you also have investors, and it's you can start feeling like, how do I protect that boundary between work and life? So I will be here. I'm here to tell you that the secret formula for thriving is boundary, systems, and communication. As Monica said, systems is fair play. We've done that talk already, but just to revisit the ownership mindset, there's a no excuse zone. Structured decision-making has to replace assumptions. And that's what our first talk was about. Mm-hmm. But the harder thing, like you said, is this boundaries. So let's just talk a little bit about communication. Mm-hmm. Communication is interesting because as a mediator, I think about it every single day. I look for it everywhere. And what I notice about communication, and what the research showed me, and also my interviews showed me, was that most people look at communication as something to do with other people and as a means to an end. So when I say, why do you communicate? It's like, well, I had to tell my husband to pick up our kid from daycare. I had to tell my mother-in-law to bring eggs over for the French toast, whatever it is, right? It's a means to an end. It's often with other people. But what I'm here to tell you, and so I want to do a thought experiment for a minute about communication. So Monica, say you're my doctor. I walk into your office and you say, are you living a physically fit lifestyle?
Mhm.
And so I say to you, absolutely. I did a spin class in 2011 for 20 minutes. So yes, right? We would all be like, what the hell is this person talking about? Either she's really strange or she doesn't understand what physically fit means, because we recognize that our bodies, the practice of being physically fit, whatever that means, is a practice. And so, but if you just substitute communication in for what I just said, I hear from people saying to me, well, I told my partner I needed space 5 years ago when our child was born and they never gave it to me.
Mhm.
So how is that any different? Communication is your most important practice. What I want people to start saying about communication is, I don't communicate as a means to an end. I communicate to get better communication. If you look at communication as that, and you say, hey, Rob, we're doing an amazing job, but we're still feeling so overwhelmed and sometimes bored. Like, what can we both do to get rid of those feelings and like include more excitement, some spectacular things in our lives that we each do for ourselves. We don't need to do it together. When you can look at things together as a problem that has to be solved and you use your communication to solve it, it's very helpful. The problem is you can't get to your partner unless you're willing to do your own self-talk. So that's the first part of the practice. So the shoulds is self-talk. Before you can communicate what you need to others, we have to unshould ourselves. That happens in our self-talk. And so what I mean by that is I really should put Anna to bed tonight. I can say that to myself, or I can reframe that in my guilt and shame journal, like I recommend in the book, and I've been doing for years. I cross out, I should put Anna to bed. I feel guilty because I'm not putting Anna to bed. And I change it to, I made the decision not to put Anna to bed because I want to have dinner with Monica. I haven't seen her in a long time and I really miss her. Because I want to journal. Because I'm going to start a first chapter of my book on how to make chocolate. Whatever it is, that it starts with how we reframe what we need first, because then the more you do it for yourself, then it starts coming out of your mouth the same way that you hear it in your head.
And one of the things that's so interesting too, Eve, is like kind of like reframing it and almost like that inner voice saying something different. Cause that's one of the hardest things to do. But once you start doing that, like it definitely starts to make a difference. One of the things that you talked about too is like, there's so much more to your friendships and your relationships if you can find your unicorn space and your creativity. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that? Because I feel like it was interesting, like how you're so right. It's like almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy to a certain degree, that as you feel more fulfilled, like all of the other things you maybe don't have to work as hard at, right? Because like you're feeling so much better. And one interesting anecdote to that is like, I find it so exciting when like now that we're out and about doing a little bit more, when we can actually sit down and like have dinner as a family and we haven't like watched what each other is doing for like the entire course of the day. Like it's exhilarating. You're like, how's your day? What happened? And like, but for a while during COVID, it was kind of hard to do that. Like,
it's like, man. It's like Charlie Brown, where the people are talking and you're like, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So like, talk a little bit about how finding that space is like, can kind of help to fulfill some other aspects in your life as well.
Well, let's play since we have a little time left. I'd love to play a game with you. And it shows you how exactly talking about your unicorn space, thinking about it is way more interesting than just saying, do you have homework due tonight? Or the baby's going to wake up, which feeding do you want? Right. So let's talk about how you could play with your colleagues, with your friends that you're going out with now, instead of saying, how's work, how's home life?
Let's do it. And if anyone
has
questions, put them in the chat too. And
happy to ask. Yes, please put anything in the chat you want to ask.
Yes.
But while you do that, or if not, we will play. So I'll just show you how much more connected you and I can get, Monica, even though we've not even met in person. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do, and then people play along with us. This would be easier if we were in person, but I'm going to read you 50 cards.
Okay.
So I'm going to read you the cards, and then I want you just to pick one that's inspiring you right now.
Okay.
And then what I'm going to do for you as your friend is I'm going to understand more about why that card's inspiring you right now. And then I'm going to give you suggestions with other cards to remix with your card. So for example, my friend said, I'm interested in art, but I'm also feeling really pissed about what's happening with reproductive rights. So I said, ooh, there's a card in here that says arrows and axes. What if we combine your art with arrows and axes? There's all these new axe throwing places. What if we take a piece of your art, we throw axes at it, and we call it rage art? So it's a really fun, and then we've been talking about when are we going to do our rage art party. So, but it's a really fun way to get to know somebody, to understand what their values are.
Cool.
It's a great thing to do with your teams. If you want psychologically safe teams, you do want to know people's values, but you don't want them to overshare and verbally diarrhea on you. It's a great way to do that through Unicorn Space. There's lots of fun ways talking about creativity can lead to deeper connection. So let's start.
Okay.
I'm gonna read you 50 cards. Just what's the card that speaks to you?
Okay,
Ready? Rhetoric, writing, memories and archiving, dance, martial arts, teaching, woodworking, music, baking, art, stitching and needles, language and anthropology, health and wellness, design, math and sciences, fashion, running, cooking, coding, engineering, theater and production, snow sports, event planning, water sports, photography, animals, performing, outdoors, travel and culture, florals, pottery, arrows and axes, that card we just said, building and DIY, genealogy and lineage, otherworldly pursuits like astrology, circus, racing, restoration and renovation, language and anthropology, metallurgy, beauty, or spiritual wellness.
okay, and just pick one.
Just one.
Cooking.
Okay, so tell me why did that card speak to you?
I don't know. There's something I find really cathartic sometimes about like just doing something that's off my computer and keeping my hands busy. And like it would be fun to be able to do more of it, or do it like my daughter and I have fun sometimes doing stuff with like that too. So there's something about cooking for me. It also like solves the problem of what to eat, but it's like, it's fun.
Tell me what values it connects to. Like what did you see in your life? You know, is there recipes you connected to? Did you see people cooking when you grew up?
Yeah.
What values does it connect to for you?
Yeah, for me, it connects a lot to like my Indian heritage, like my mom and my grandmother. Like I think their love language in a lot of ways was cooking and making stuff for us. And so I don't know, there's just something about being able to do that for other people, even with however busy the day is, or like the things that go on. There's just something for me that feels good about being able to make something for somebody. And I also like how it can connect you to other people. Like I've spent a lot of time like cooking with my mom. My grandmother is no longer around, but sometimes recipes can kind of take you back and remind you. And I think as an American that came from a mother who's an immigrant, it's also something that can really connect you with your culture in a way that like you can kind of take through generations too, like making the same recipes with my daughter that I made with my grandmother, even though she's not here anymore. Like there's just something that brings like generations that aren't even here together with cooking.
Well, I'm going to cry. See, I feel like I know you better already. But let me tell you what I'm reflecting back as your friend. And again, if you're on a team as a leader, you could do this too. The values that I'm hearing from you is that from cooking, it was a generational legacy. So you were able to connect with your past, but also pass it on to the future, share this connection between the generations. I heard that it allowed a connection while also being able to give of yourself in some way. I heard hands, because, actually thinking with our hands is a different cognitive skill than thinking with our brain. So it brings up allows you to maybe let your brain stop thinking and thinking with another cognitive part of your body. Fun, which I thought was a beautiful value. Heritage, and love.
Mm-hmm.
So what I love about that is I will hand you those values back, because I think besides cooking, I'm going to assume that a lot of those values of connection, generational legacy, hands, fun, love are also probably other values that you bring to other things in your life. And so knowing that there are experiences out there that you can connect with, I think are really, really beautiful. So I'm going to combine a card for you. So I'm going to say, given what you said, I think writing, I want to combine the card of writing with your love of cooking. And what I will say is, I'd love for you to ask your daughter or to work with your daughter on collecting 5 family recipes in the next 6 months. And then learning to cook those recipes and then writing them down somewhere in a Monica and Andy post or on your social media. But I would love to learn from you, your family recipes. So and also foraging and finding. So foraging for those recipes in your heritage and somewhere in you or your husband's past, finding 5 of those, getting curious about those recipes, and then cooking them one a month, almost like a recipe club.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I hadn't even thought about that in terms of, being able to like save stuff and keep it, and take it out from people's heads and put it onto paper, which is really cool.
I think it'd be so fun, either as a video vlog, or something that you can write down, or maybe even put it in a letter to your daughter. And so she has 5 letters to open up, and they're just recipes that came from somebody in your family. Now that you say that, I think I want to do that too, even though I don't connect, cooking would not be my unicorn space. But I think it's so beautiful to start thinking about that, right? So at the table, what would Rob pick? What would your children pick? As young as 5, my daughter is 5. She looks at these cards and she picked lipstick, she picked beauty. Let's not talk about what that means for society. But I think the idea of, she really is attracted to beautiful things. And I see in how she puts herself together in a way that I don't. I wear like sweatpants. I'm the Zoom uniform every day, but she really loves to put things in order and with a lot of beauty around it. She loves florals. So getting to know what people love, what's interesting to them right now, really awesome. What's beautiful about it is the question you asked, which is that it becomes a greater connection to their values, and it allows you to have deeper conversations. Like, I didn't know about your Indian heritage. Like, it's so beautiful to understand that. I didn't know your mom was a immigrant. And now I have these deeper connections to you that I probably wouldn't have gotten to if we just stayed in a normal conversation.
Definitely. And which one, Eve, would you have picked? Like, is there stuff, I'm sure like people know a little bit about you, but like, is there anything that would have surprised people on one of the ones that you might've picked yourself?
Well, I do talk a lot about my return to dance. So I will say probably, this is I was sent my jazz hand, my costume. So wearing costumes is really fun. And I will say that a return to dance it's really been fun for me. I always wanted to be a Nick City dancer. That was an unfulfilled dream. So returning to that. But also it's been interesting because, like you, Monica, a lot of people, when I've been getting data from them through this game, have been talking about this beauty of working with their hands. I'm very cerebral, meaning like I'm, I look the way I do, but really inside I'm probably like Jerry Seinfeld. Like, I'm a neurotic New York Jew that lives in my head. And so the idea of being able to take something out of my head and put into my hands, even though I've never done that before, I keep thinking, so many people say that is a respite for them. It's making me feel more inclined to try something different, like pottery or foraging outdoors, or something that's so out of my comfort zone, given that I grew up in a very urban environment and I have no connection to nature.
And it's interesting that you say that too, because I think one of the things, and maybe why I gravitated to cooking and it's really fun about the dancing too, is I feel like, and I look at like my daughter's attention span, like if she sits down to read a book, and now I'm not talking about this book, because I feel like this book I was able to sit down and really read. So if people haven't gotten it, they absolutely should. But I feel like sometimes you sit down to try to read a book and like you find yourself back on your phone, right? Like, you're like, oh, you do it for like 2 seconds and then you're like, what's happening on Instagram? What's happening in email? So I think the idea that like you can do something with your hands that just like, it just makes you or keeps you busy. So I guess one of my final questions is, for Unicorn Space, is it okay for people to be like kids? Like, can you just go out and try stuff you never did before? Like,
yes, of course.
Yeah. And I feel like
so fun about that. I love that question about something you never did before, because I think that's the beauty of this, is that, Monica, a weird part of the data was that as people got more successful, as they admitted to me or were reported to me, more like it, that they were part of the 9.9%, or they got to be more upper middle class. Ironically, I think the extrinsic milestones of success, whether it's buying a home or having another child or a nice car, started to fill up a lot of their goals. As my colleague Mark Muthi Joseph says in Unicorn Space, I'll misquote him, but he says something like, communities that haven't had access to monetary capital are more used to trading in creative capital. So what I will say is, don't let extrinsic milestones dictate what you do. If you're going to spend time making those decisions and say, right, like, I want to spend all of my time, saving for that bigger house, like, make sure that it connects to your values. It's really what you want to do. Because what I will say is that starting something new and fun that actually is intrinsically motivating, that connects with your values, is just as important as those extrinsic milestones in terms of your mental health and your longevity. And so, yes, what that means is that I think about, and I will end on the story of Kat Medina, who I love so much. She was working at Sam's Club when I interviewed her, and her husband's an auto mechanic. And this was before the pandemic. They had really strange hours. But when her husband came home, he heard in the other room a narration, a voice that he thought was a podcast or a book on audio. He walks into the room. He realizes it's his wife reading to their son. He says to her, "Wow, you sound like an audiobook. The way you narrate is so beautiful. I didn't realize your voice could sound like that." She got inspired by him saying that and said, talk about never done something before. What would it look like to narrate an audiobook? So she gets curious and just Googles how to narrate an audiobook. It turns out there's actually places online where you can submit a Dropbox file, an MP3 of yourself speaking a voice memo, to audition to narrate an audiobook. So she finds a microphone on clearance at Sam Club's where she works. She borrows her husband's laptop and she just decides to read Princesses Behaving Badly. I guess it's a book. I don't know that book, but I have to get it now. So she tells me she reads this book. A week later, she gets a call. She gets booked as an audio narrator.
Wow.
So she reads this book for this author. She has this beautiful connection with the author, and completion. It gets uploaded into the world. And soon after that, she tells her mom she wants to tattoo on her arm, reading books is like breathing air. And so her mother's like, why don't you hold your horses since you've read like one book? Not sure you need to tattoo that on your arm. But her point to me, why she was ready to tattoo that on her arm, is because it was an experience that couldn't be taken away from her. That no matter what, that book was out there in the world. She did that. Mm-hmm. And so I think about her all the time because it's such a beautiful and courageous thing to say, even if I never do it again, it's still as important to me to tattoo it on my arm, to remember the memory of doing something like that, that connected to my core values of storytelling and beauty and my love of books. And so that's what I will say, is that even if it's not every day, just the recognition that when I said to her, what was your life like before you were reading books? And then she pointed to her tattoo and she said, well, what's life like when you don't breathe air?
Wow.
And so, yes, we deserve to breathe air. And if that's something you've never done before, but you're just curious about, the answer is you do that. You start where you are. You start with your curiosity. And if it aligns with your values, then you know you're on the right path.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to go out and take the challenge and we're going to write down those recipes and
write the recipes. And then you have to send me one. I will cook your recipe once you send it to me.
I will definitely do it. And Eve, thank you so much for continuing to inspire us. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot in Fair Play, and I feel like it was like life-changing for my relationship, but the unicorn space was just for me. And I loved that so much. And I feel like the more that we can inspire people and build awareness earlier in that journey of motherhood, right, so that you keep that spot and don't have to reclaim it, right? Like that's the ultimate. If
That's
they're
right. Keep
with
your
it,
initial on your neck.
yes.
Do not take your initial off your neck ever.
So maybe the next generation of moms, like they already know this because they read the book and they never have to reclaim it.
Right.
Well, we're doing the work of doing so. But thank you so much for sharing. It was wonderful to have you and excited to continue to watch you on your journey as well.
Monica, you're the best. I love being with you too. I love your company and the values it stands for too. Thank you for being a wonderful entrepreneur, and also for being a role model in the home for how you divide up domestic labor.
Thank you so much. Great to see you, Eve. Excited to
Bye, and tell Rob hello. Tell him
Will
we
do.
love him. All
Thank
right,
you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.